And we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. What does this passage say about God's opinion of you? What does it say about your biggest failure? If you're going through a difficult period in your life right now, whether it's financial, relational, health-related, or anything else, I want to encourage you by reminding you that nothing is too difficult for God. Nothing can hinder him from bringing you out of your situation. Do you want to forget that God specializes in taking what the enemy meant for evil and turning it around for good? I'd like to share with you a story that I believe will inspire you and help you put things into perspective. There was a young man who became very discouraged because he was failing his exams over and over again. He felt like an outcast, like he wasn't smart enough, good enough, or destined for greatness. He wanted to quit school and give up on his dreams. But one day, he decided to visit his pastor for guidance. The pastor listened to the young man's story and told him something that changed his life forever. God still has plans and purposes for you, the pastor said. Don't give up on yourself. You just need to trust in God's timing. The young man didn't really understand what the pastor meant at first, but he decided to follow his advice and keep trying. One day, the young man received an invitation to a university open house event. He went to the event and met with a professor who taught the course he was interested in. The professor was impressed by the young man's enthusiasm and passion for learning despite his poor grades. He offered him a chance to enroll in his program and become his research assistant. This meant that the young man wouldn't have to take any exams to get into the university, but instead would be able to learn and grow under the guidance of a world-renowned professor. The young man took this opportunity and excelled in his studies. He eventually graduated with honors and went on to have a successful career, when he realized that his biggest failure had actually been the best thing that could have ever happened to him. God had used his repeated exam failures to open doors for him that would have remained closed otherwise. This story teaches us that our biggest failures can often be the stepping stones to our greatest successes. We just need to trust in God's plan and timing and remember that he has a purpose for everything that happens in our lives. As Christians, we serve a God who specializes in taking our mistakes and turning them into miracles. When we face challenges and feel like giving up, we can find strength and encouragement in the story of the young man and the words of the pastor. We must not despise small beginnings. God can take our seemingly insignificant actions and use them to accomplish his will. For example, Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery out of jealousy and anger. But God used this act of betrayal to save not only Joseph's life, but also the lives of many others. In Genesis chapter 45, verse 7, Joseph said to his brothers, "You intended to harm me by selling me into slavery, but God intended it for good, to preserve your life." Similarly, Esther, a young Jewish woman who was chosen to be Queen Esther, had to reveal her identity to King Artaxerxes in order to save her people from annihilation. Although she was afraid and knew that revealing herself could cost her life, she trusted that God had placed her in that position for such a time as this. In Esther chapter 4, verse 14, Mordecai tells Esther, "Who knows, perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this." Likewise, Daniel, who was thrown into the lion's den by King Darius for praying 3 times a day, was saved by God, despite the risk he took. In Daniel chapter 6, verse 23, the king approached Daniel in the den and said, "Daniel, servant of the living God, I am impressed by the faith you have shown for your God, for here you are, your God sent his angel and has saved you from the clutches of the lions." In each of these cases, the main characters faced situations where they had to make difficult decisions that could have ended in disaster. However, they trusted that God had a plan and purpose for their lives and were willing to follow his lead, no matter the cost. They understood that even if things didn't turn out the way they wanted, God could still use their circumstances to bring about his will and accomplish his purposes. This reminds us that we must never lose sight of God's bigger picture, and that our current challenges may be just a small part of something much greater. Just as Joseph's brothers, Esther and Daniel, took steps of faith in their own stories, we too must be willing to do the same. Even when we do and understand God's plan or feel like we not capable of handling the situation, we must trust that He will be with us every step of the way and that He will help us succeed in whatever we set out to do. I've learned from my own experience that even when things seem impossible and we feel like we're facing our greatest challenges, we must never give up on God's promises or lose faith in His plan. Instead, we must remember that God has a bigger picture in mind and that our current difficulties are just a small part of it. Now let's dive deeper into the topic of God's thoughts about your biggest failure. You see, in Romans chapter 8, verses 28, we read, "And we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to His purpose." This verse tells us that God has a plan and purpose for our lives, and that everything that happens in our lives, whether good or bad, ultimately works together for our good if we love God and are committed to following Him. This means that even our biggest mistakes and failures can be used by God to accomplish His will and bring about our ultimate good. But you might be thinking, how can my failures be used for good? Can't they cause pain, suffering, and set me back from achieving my goals? Well, the answer lies in how we respond to our failures. When we fail, we have the choice to either give up on God or turn to Him for help. When we choose to seek God in the midst of our failures, He can help us learn from our mistakes, become more resilient, and grow in our faith. Our failures can become opportunities for us to develop new skills, gain wisdom, and become more compassionate toward others who are also struggling. For example, when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, he could have blamed God for allowing him to suffer. But instead, he chose to trust that God had a plan for him and eventually became the governor of Egypt. His ability to forgive his brothers and lead Egypt during a time of famine showed the world the transformative power of faith and resilience. Similarly, when Esther had to reveal her identity to King Artaxerxes, she could have been consumed by fear and worry. But instead, she chose to rely on God's guidance and courage and ultimately saved her people from annihilation. Her willingness to take risks and trust in God's plan made her a hero and an inspiration to many. In the same way, when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, he could have panicked and given up hope. But instead, he chose to continue praying to God and was rewarded by being saved from the lions. His faithfulness in prayer and trust in God's protection gave him the strength to overcome his fears and stand firm in his beliefs. As Christians, we must remember that although we may face challenges and setbacks in life, we can trust that God has a plan and purpose for us. Our failures don't define us, but our response to them does. When we choose to turn to God in the midst of our failures, He can help us learn, grow, and become more like Him. So don't be afraid to take risks, trust in God's plan, and be courageous in the face of adversity. Embrace your failures as opportunities to learn and grow and know that God is with you every step of the way. I hope this message has inspired you and given you a new perspective on your biggest failure. Remember, you are not defined by your mistakes, but by your response to them. Trust in God's plan, learn from your failures, and keep moving forward. God bless you.